Moving on, next we will have the CDAO Yedun Award presentation. And to present the award, may I please request the President of CDAO and TCC, Ms. Sikyong, on the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, this evening, on behalf of our Tibetan community in Ontario, the board of the Canadian Tibetan Association is truly delighted and honored to make this special announcement. Our Sikyong does not need an introduction. However, in his role as the political leader of the Tibetans, he has, over the past 3.5 years, supported the vision of His Holiness and His Holiness's call for a middle way approach. Dr. Sikyong's administration continues to emphasize the importance of seeking a peaceful, non-violent resolution for the Tibet issue. His leadership has been an inspiration for many younger generation Tibetans who were born and raised as stateless individuals, but who through grit, sheer determination, and will succeeded in getting quality education to lead the Tibetan people. A Tibetan scholar, a Harvard Fellow, and now the political leader of Tibetans, Dr. Sikyong continues to be an inspiration for all of us. Therefore, on the 80th birthday celebration of His Holiness, the Canadian Tibetan Association offers this Gede Award to Dr. Sangay with a citation, honoring Sikyong Dr. Lobsang Sangay for his strong leadership, unwavering support, and commitment to the vision of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Dr. Lobsang Sangay.
Thank you very much, Zomla. Now, may I please request Honorable Sikyong Dr. Lobsang Sangay to say a few words.
Dear friends, honored guests, members of the Canadian Parliament, as well as I'm delighted to see former dedicated civil servant of Central Tibetan Administration, as well as many friends, Chinese friends and other friends, and to all the guests here today, on behalf of the Central Tibetan Administration, I would like to congratulate the gala dinner today. It so happened that this is the 8th gala dinner, because I took my oath also on August 8th of 2011. So I think 8th sounds good to me also. So to all the organizers and volunteers, would like to congratulate, and this is very important because the center needs your support and your generosity. Please continue to do so. And I'm really honored and privileged to be here tonight. And if I say a few words about the Central Tibet Administration, and I know the dinner is getting ready. I know you all are more tempted to go for the dinner than listen to boring speech that I'm going to make. But then, being a chief guest, always there's disadvantage. Everything needs to be said. It's already said by all other guests. And then there's nothing left to say. But then as a chief guest, you are expected to say something. So I thought I would share something about the Central Tibet Administration, and then perhaps about Inside Tibet. The Chinese government published the white paper is indeed the 13th one. I thought I'll give you at least a sense of what is in the white paper and our response to that. Then perhaps a few words at the end about the future of Tibet. About the Central Tibet administration, many of you are very familiar, but this is one of the legacy of His Holiness Dalai Lama, which is not that well known, which is a democratic legacy. In true sense of the word, His Holiness is a democrat, in the sense, after we lost our country, after the occupation of Tibet, 80,000 Tibetans and His Holiness Dalai Lama had to flee and seek exile in India. Immediately, he felt that we have to embrace democracy, we have to embrace modernization, hence introduce a democratic setup in Dharamsala. And then from 1960 on, we have had election of the parliament, and then from 2001, the election of my position, Sikyong, and then 2011, His Holiness Dalai Lama separated the church and the state, so to speak, and His Holiness continues to remain our most revered leader, and then my position is given the political responsibilities. So even though His Holiness was in his 20s, but he had the vision in 1959 to set up a democratic institution so that Tibetan people can move forward with the democratic institution in the future. Now, in 1963, His Holiness mandated at that time, because he was both a spiritual and political leader, mandated to have women representation in the Tibetan parliament. I think we were a few years ahead of Switzerland, which introduced women representation in 1971, and perhaps Liechtenstein, which introduced women representation in 1984. But then, in 1963, again His Holiness Dalai Lama felt strongly that we have to have a democratic constitution as well. And why it is democratic is, he said there has to be provision of impeachment. Impeachment of whom? Impeachment of the Dalai Lama. Now in 1963, 4 years after we lost our country, who would have thought to impeach the Dalai Lama? But His Holiness mandated, insisted despite protests, the provision for impeachment has to stay, because if you want to be democratic, then everybody has to be subservient to the constitution, including the Dalai Lama. So that was his vision. And then over 50 years we have grown, and we have consolidated democratic system in exile. So this is one of the legacies of His Holiness that is not known, and it's very important that His Holiness has what we call single-handedly given democracy to us, and then we are doing the best we can to embrace and move forward. And now we will be, soon we'll be celebrating 56 years of democracy in exile. Now, as for the situation inside Tibet, recently Chinese government published the 13th white paper on Tibet. Now, why I say 13 is, when you publish a white paper, normally from market point of view, you want to sell something, you want to sell a brand, which is very important, then you come out with a white paper. And for governments, when you want to project some issue very important in black and white, then you come out with white paper. But then the Chinese government has come out with 13 white paper on Tibet. I'm not trying to compare, but for Xinjiang they have published only 2. For Inner Mongolia they have not published even a single one. On Hong Kong they have published only 1. But on Tibet they have published 13. Every 2 or 3 years, they were, in a sense, they were forced to come out with a white paper to counter the narrative of Tibetans, especially exile. In that sense, with our friends around the world, despite the Chinese power, despite the money that they have, despite the efforts, the narrative of Tibet has prevailed, which is our narrative. That is, Tibet is still under occupation. There is political repression, environmental destruction, economic marginalization, cultural assimilation, and social discrimination. This is the narrative of Tibet, and this is the narrative endorsed and supported by our friends around the world, and Chinese government has to come out with white paper every 2-3 years, and then we know it's, I think, too little, too late for their attempts. Nonetheless, they have come out. And in this white paper, interestingly, on the history section, this is very new. For the first time, they have said that Tibet has been part of China since antiquity. Now, this is a very new version. This is historical revisionism, you can clearly see. Tibet has been part of China since antiquity. But the white paper of 2004 says Tibet became part of China in 13th century. That there is a contradiction between the two. If you go by the Republican era, then some of the Chinese authors have said Tibet became part of China during the Republican time. But then if you go by the 17-point agreement, which was forced on Tibetans, but signed on May 23, 1951, the preamble of the 17-point agreement says, Tibet shall return to the motherland. Now, if Tibet was returning to the motherland in 1951, then clearly Tibet was not part of China before 1951. So even in Chinese documents, there's a contradiction. 13th century, 1951, or the early 20th century, or since antiquity. So this blatant historical revisionism to claim that Tibet has been part of China since antiquity will not be believed and supported by the international community, but this is one aspect. Another part of white papers even questions His Holiness Dalai Lama's commitment to non-violence. Now we all know for a fact that His Holiness has traveled 50+ countries. He has been awarded 150-some awards and degrees, including the Nobel Peace Prize for his commitment to non-violence. And here is Chinese government questioning His Holiness' commitment to non-violence. So it does get a little ridiculous, but this is the attempt. And then other chapter also claims that China has made a lot of progress in Tibet, and Tibetans are very happy and content. Now we all know for a fact that if Tibetans are happy and content, I for one can say, and I think many of the Tibetans here in this room will support me, that if Chinese government really truly believe that Tibetans in Tibet are happy and content, then they can have a referendum in Tibet. And they can choose a Tibetan candidate and a Chinese candidate. And let them vote and decide who they want to choose. I'm pretty sure Tibetan vote for a Tibetan leader, not a Chinese leader. That will determine whether Tibetans are actually content and happy in Tibet or not. Now, so they also, in a way, questions our commitment to, they also question our middle way policy itself. As you know, Central Tibet Administration, as stated by the President Singh Somla, we are committed to seek genuine autonomy within China and within the framework of the Chinese Constitution. We believe this is a win-win proposition for both the Chinese government and the Tibetan people. Yet, they are questioning what does middle way mean and whether it's a springboard for independence or not. And then, I think a day or two later, the Vice Minister, former Vice Minister who was in charge of the United Front, Tu Wei-chun himself confessed. He said, in recent years, the Dalai clique or the Central Tibet Administration have made efforts and create awareness about the middle way approach. Hence, they are reverting to that effort. That means, in recent years, Central Tibet Administration has launched a campaign to create awareness about the middle way approach, and there is the effort to counter the awareness campaign. So you can clearly see the Chinese government feeling the pinch of our truth and people around the world supporting our justice for Tibetan people. In short, no matter how many white papers Chinese government come out with, I think truth is with the Tibetan people. Justice is what we seek. Now, often when I travel around, I'm always asked, why did you take this job? It's such a difficult job. The Chinese government is so powerful. Do you think you have any hope? And I always say, I'm sure the same story was told when Nelson Mandela was in prison for 28 years, of which 8 years in solitary confinement. I'm sure many of if you read the news accounts during those days, Nelson Mandela was written off by some saying, well, forget about restoring democracy in South Africa. He cannot be released from the prison. But we all saw Nelson Mandela walking tall out of the prison and restoring democracy in South Africa. I'm sure same thing was said about Northern Ireland. Recently, I met one of the leaders of the Northern Ireland, and a Canadian general was involved in the Good Friday Agreement. At one time, Northern Ireland was intractable issue that there was no solution at all. But then the Good Friday was signed, Northern Ireland also happened. And the best story that I have is about the Berlin Wall. When I met former president of Poland, Lech Walesa, and he told me, then German vice chancellor and the foreign minister was visiting him. And then the foreign minister of West Germany asked Lech Walesa, what does he think of all the students and youth surrounding the Berlin Wall? And he said, Berlin Wall is going to come down. You better be prepared. And then Foreign Minister of West Germany said, well, I would like to see that kind of trouble, but it's not going to happen in my lifetime. 2 weeks later, Berlin Wall came down. Even the Foreign Minister of West Germany at that time did not believe the Berlin Wall was coming down, and it did. So similarly, we might believe this powerful China is difficult for many countries. But like the Great Wall that they built to prevent barbarians from entering into China, but the Great Wall was of no use when actually invaders came to China. So they are building firewalls to prevent information from getting into China. But this firewall will also give way to truth and justice of the Tibetan people. When that day comes, as per the aspirations of the Tibetan people inside Tibet, as per the 138 Tibetans who committed self-immolation, who burned themselves, of which 23 are women and 7 nuns. Very sad, very unfortunate. But their aspirations are the same as aspirations of 6 million Tibetans and Tibetans outside Tibet. That is, they want to see the return of His Holiness Dalai Lama to Tibet and freedom for Tibetans. That aspiration, that dream, my dear friends, will come true soon. When that happens, that will be one of the best stories of the 21st century. Thank you.